My girlfriend's little brother Jake needs a gaming PC to hold him over till Christmas so that we can get him something better. But in the meantime, he doesn't have a computer quite powerful enough to play the games he wants to play with all his friends, like Fortnite Season 3, Valorant, and he actually really wants to play Skyrim, the modded version. But luckily, two of my buddies just donated 2 computers to the channel, and what we're going to do is take both machines, take the best parts from both, and build one ultra budget gaming PC so Jake can play his favorite games with all his friends. We're also going to give ourselves a budget of $150 to give the computer some much needed upgrades. So if you guys have an older gaming PC, maybe your older brother or one of your friends gave you, don't throw it away just yet, because this just might be the video you were looking for. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to Tech 215. I'm your host Nick, and in today's video, like I said, we have 2 machines that 2 of my friends donated. We're going to take the best parts out of both machines and build one really awesome ultra budget build and inject $150 worth of the upgrades. But before we get started, guys, please remember, if you like the video, hit the subscribe button. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers. All the support of late has been really appreciated, so hit the subscribe button. If you like the video, give it a like. But as you guys know, I reply, I read, I answer questions. So if you have questions or comments or concerns, leave them down below and I will gladly answer any of your questions. Alright, so guys, with all that out of the way, let's take a look at both computers that John and Justin donated to the channel. Let's start with build number 1. Okay guys, so let's take a look at build number 1, which was donated by one of my good buddies, Justin. And this PC is an absolute dust factory, but don't let that fool you. It still has some good components for an ultra budget build. At the heart of this build is the AMD FX 4100, released in October of 2011. It features 4 cores on the AM3 Plus platform, codenamed Bulldozer. With a base clock speed of 3.6 GHz, a max boost clock of 3.8 GHz, and 8 MB of level 3 cache, we were off to a good start. It also featured a really nice ATX Asus M5A97 Evo motherboard. I was very delighted to see that it came with 16 GB of Mushkin DDR3 clocked at 1600 MHz, but not so delighted with the ancient GPU, the NVIDIA GTX 550 Ti. The case was in decent shape and also came with a 600-watt APEVA PSU, which is great because we're definitely going to need a power supply with a 6/8-pin connector to power our GPU. But before we make any decisions on what to keep, let's take a look at build number 2. Build number 2 is donated by one of my absolute oldest and best friends in the world, John. Build number 2 is actually a little bit older, but this time it was an Intel build. It featured an Asus P7H55 Micro ATX Pro and came with a first-gen i3-530, which was released all the way back in January of 2010. It also came with a 2x1 kit of Corsair XMS3, which is basically a 2 GB kit of 1333 MHz memory. It featured a very interesting blue case from a no-name brand and also had an older Antec 350-watt power supply that didn't have any 6 or 8-pin connectors, and no video card was found. Now remember guys, we still have $150 for upgrades, so with that in mind, here's the parts we decided to keep. For our motherboard, we went with Team Blue and kept the first-gen Intel Asus P7H55 Micro ATX Pro. My plan was to use some of our upgrade budget and get a better CPU for this platform, and that's exactly what we did by buying the Xeon X3440 for only $12 on eBay. Basically, the Xeon X3440 is an i7-960 with a lower base clock speed and no integrated graphics. If you guys just look at the comparison on the screen, they are virtually identical, but the older Xeons are always so much cheaper. From the black build, we decided to keep the case, obviously the 16 GB of memory, and the PSU. So now with $138 left, we had to put our thinking caps on so we could really maximize our budget. Since the motherboard and X3440 were overclockable, we decided to spend $35 and pick up a decent tower cooler. So we went with an absolute classic, the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo Black Edition. We would now be able to get a ton of free performance by overclocking our X3440 from 2.5 gigahertz to possibly 4 gigahertz. That's the definition of overclocking headroom, something these days is getting harder and harder to find in newer CPUs. The next thing we needed to do, and guys, you know this about me, you have to have an SSD as your primary boot drive in 2020. So we went with a super cheapo Inland Pro 120 gigabyte SSD from Micro Center for $22. I also know for a fact that Jake has a Samsung 860 500 gigabyte SSD, so I'm not too concerned about storage. So our system is really starting to shape up nicely here, but there is one thing that's missing, and it's the most crucial component in a gaming PC, the graphics card. We really wanted to keep our budget for upgrades at $150 or less, and at the time of making this video, I had a few potential cards I could use. First, a dual fan Gigabyte WindForce OC 750 Ti and a Zotac low-powered 750 Ti. Both cards I bought on the used market for $50 and $40. The 750 Ti is one of my favorite budget GPUs of all time because of how long it stayed relevant. We could still use this card for the build, but I definitely wanted to give Jake a little bit more power. Plus, the Zotac version will be much better suited for an OEM pre-built like a Dell Optiplex or a Lenovo M90 series that doesn't have a 6/8 pin connector coming off the PSU, so we'll pass on the 750 Ti. Next, I have a low-power GTX 1050 3GB and a GTX 960 4GB, both cards from EVGA. And both these cards perform roughly around the same in most games, but the 1050 3GB, much like the low-powered Zotac 750 Ti, doesn't require any additional power connectors. It runs straight off the PCI Express slot and would be a really nice addition to one of the many OEMs I have laying around the office. And the 960 is a much better card than the 750 Ti, but I still think we can find something with a bit more horsepower. The next option we had is my much newer Asus Radeon RX 5500 XT. Such a great budget GPU. It would meet all the requirements and needs for Jake's use case, but this card would simply destroy our budget. Coming in at $180, we just couldn't fit it in our budget. Finally, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, this one was just right. I remembered I recently picked up an RX 580 8GB for only $75. Paired up with our Xeon X3440, SSD, and 16 gigabytes of RAM, this was the card that made the most sense. It had the power to play all the games, and it also fit our budget. So here's a quick hardware recap of what we kept and the upgrades. So now it's time to clean this dust bowl up and put it all together. Okay, so let's run a few benchmarks and start with one of the most impressive things about this $12 CPU, the overclocking headroom. In Cinebench R20 at the base clock speed, which is 2.5 gigahertz, we get only 803 points. But I started pumping a little bit more voltage into the X3440 a little bit at a time, and each time we gained a little bit more performance. And the furthest I could get was to 3.6 gigahertz, resulting in a score of 1201. Not quite the 4 gigahertz we were hoping to get, but still an almost 50% increase in Cinebench R20. Not too bad. However, in Unigine Heaven, there wasn't too big of a difference going from 105 FPS and a score of 2648 to 109 FPS and a score of 2748. Only a 4% change in improvement. So in the Fortnite and on epic details and view distance, the X3440 and RX 580 combo hit the magical 60 FPS mark, but on pro settings, which is low detail epic view distance, our scores climbed all the way up to 154 FPS. But I didn't build this machine for me, I built it for Jake. So let's see what he's got to say. So Jake, what do you think of your new computer?
Oh, I love Xeons.
There you go.